Welcome to episode 86 of the Cycling Europe podcast. My name is Andrew Sykes. In this episode of the podcast, we're going to be talking to Cycling UK, or more specifically, Sophie Gordon, who works at Cycling UK and is one of the people responsible for developing the routes that they have been introducing over the last few years. If you're a member of Cycling UK and have just received your copy of Cycle magazine, you will have noticed that the front cover is dedicated to the March Away, which is the new route that has just been introduced. So a few days ago, I took the opportunity of chatting to Sophie, not just about the new route, but about the development of all the other routes over the last few years.
I'm Sophie Gordon. I'm the campaigns manager at Cycling UK. And while a lot of my work is sort of about advocacy and trying to improve the conditions for cycling, I've also been quite lucky that I've got to work over the past few years on developing some of our long distance routes, which is a pretty good job, I'm not going to lie.
Have you always been a cyclist? Have you done lots of long distance cycling? Or was it something that you kind of discovered through doing the job?
I guess I'm never sure whether to call myself a cyclist really, because I grew up sort of in Derby and we went to Peak District a lot as a family, so kind of grew up cycling on all those old railway trails, and the Monsell Trail and the High Peak Trail. And then I did a bit of cycle courier work when I was at university, and then kind of one or two just like long weekend cycle trips, I think. But then it wasn't until I started working at Cycling UK and people would kind of go out for rides together in the evenings. And I sort of thought, oh yeah, people just go out for bike rides as well as just using it for a way to get around. And kind of, rediscovered the fun of just going out for a day or going out for a shorter one and on my mountain bike around the bridleways. And I love some of the lovely heathland and things that we have here. But yeah, my usual way I describe it is I either do 20-minute trips to get around places every day, or I pack up a tent and I go off for a week, and there's not a lot in the middle.
And are you still based in the Peak District in Derbyshire?
I live in Guildford now, which is where Cycle UK's main office is, so down in Surrey. But yeah, I do quite a lot of going around the UK to more sort of rugged and mountainous parts.
And how many years have you worked for Cycling UK?
For, I think it's 6 years now. So it feels like quite a while because we've had a lot of newer people who've started since then.
Right, okay, we're going to talk about the various routes that Cycling UK has developed over the recent years. So I think there are now 8 of them in total, and the most recent one, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes, is the March Castles Way. But kind of taking it one step back, what was the motivation for Cycling UK actually developing these routes? Because I suppose when a lot of cyclists think about cycling routes, they don't automatically think of Cycling UK. They think of Cycling UK as more of an advocacy group, a group that represents and brings together cyclists of all different types. And they tend to think of Sustrans and the National Cycle Network as the people who are looking after the routes. So what was the original thinking about developing these routes?
Yeah, I suppose Cycling UK's relationship with putting routes together has probably fluctuated quite a bit over the years, because I know back when it was the Cyclist Touring Club, we've got all the stacks of old folders and things on shelves in the office that were sort of the files for if members would call up and say, I want to do a tour in Africa. What can you tell me? What maps have you got? What advice have you got? So there was a big thing then about kind of providing advice for touring and suggested routes that other people had done and that sort of thing. And we've got various kind of routes collected on our website that different people have put together and recommended. But these longer ones sort of started more recently, originally as part of our campaigning for off-road access. Because I think talking about sort of the rights of way system feels a bit dry and abstract, and it's quite hard to make it sound interesting. So these routes were a bit of a way to illustrate some of the problems with the current system if you're going out into the countryside on a bike, and bring it to life a little bit. So the first one we did was the North Downs Way National Trail, which goes through Surrey and Kent. And you couldn't ride the whole of the National Trail route because it kind of alternates between bits of bridleways that you can cycle on and then bits of footpath. So we thought, well, can we do a sort of braided version where we use the sections that you can ride and then we join it up with parallel bits of quiet road or bridleways and then kind of link it back in. So then it means you can do that whole 150 miles from end to end. And people got quite excited about that. They really liked that idea, and the North Downs Way trail managers actually kind of adopted that as an alternative route to promote to people who want to cycle it. So that was pretty cool. And then the next one we were thinking about was the Pennine Bridleway, which that's actually one of, I think there are 16 national trails in England and Wales, and there's only that one and the South Downs Way that you can ride from end to end. But it's never really been finished because the Pennine Way walking route goes all the way up to the Scottish border, about 250 miles. But the Pennine Bridleway, which was created as a version for mountain bikes and horses, it just kind of stops and dumps you out on a busy A road in the middle of nowhere. So we sort of wanted to make a point of that and say, well, isn't it time this was finished off? There were plans 20 years ago and it's just never really happened. So can we look at different bits of trails and link them together and make a kind of interim route that extends it into Scotland? And then it was quite funny because this group called Obscura Mondo Cycle Club, who are based in Scotland, got in touch with us and said, oh, well, we've put together this route that goes from Glasgow all the way up to Cape Wrath on the north coast. Why don't you attach that to the one that you're working on and we'll make this really long version? So that became a sort of 750-mile epic that is the Great North Trail, which is a fabulous route.
Yeah, because I'm just looking at the website now. That Great North Trail is 1,300 kilometres compared to the North Downs Way, like as you said, is only 150 miles. So what's that, about 250 kilometres? So it was a big step up from doing a relatively short route to doing something that was actually, I mean, if you cycled the whole thing, the Great North Trail, it's probably going to take you at least 10 days, probably more like 2 weeks.
Well, longer than that, I think. One of my colleagues did it in 2 weeks, and yeah, his big thing at the end of it was amazing, but I wish I'd had more time because it's quite rough terrain and it's very, very hilly. So yeah, it's definitely a big difference in the length, and I suppose a lot of it was combining sections that already exist. The Pennine Bridleway was a big chunk, and then that Anturas Moor route from Glasgow to Cape Wrath, which is Gaelic for the long journey, which is wonderfully poetic, I think. But, they'd already created that, so it's partly kind of showing how to join these things together and just inspiring people. I don't know about you, but when I see a long route on a map, I'm just like, oh, that looks amazing. I want to go and do it.
Oh yeah, God, absolutely. Yeah, I've got maps left, right, and centre in my house. I just spend hours staring at them. You mentioned working with other bodies for the North Downs Way and then also for the Great North Trail, those first two routes. Was there any reluctance or opposition even from, for example, you've mentioned bridleways a few times. Was there any opposition from horse riders who thought, "Oh my God, all these cyclists, they're going to kind of invade our bridleways, which are, our territory"? Was there any negative feeling? Was there anything they had to overcome to actually get the routes up and running?
I think that's a kind of interesting part of the puzzle of putting these routes together, is trying to talk to the various land managers on the way, and whether that's kind of Forestry England or bits of National Trust land or the councils who look after it, and just sort of finding out if there are any concerns with particular nature reserves areas or sites of special scientific interest that we need to be aware of and kind of work around. And I think with the horse riders, it's quite interesting. We actually have a very good relationship with the British Horse Society because in a lot of respects, we're kind of pushing for the same things because, whether you're riding a bike or a horse, you're kind of on the same paths when you're out in the countryside, and we all want to be able to access more places. So kind of we get to the point where we've got routes that, you can ride on a mountain bike and you can potentially also ride on a horse. So they work quite nicely as promoted routes if somebody looks at those and kind of thinks, how can we adapt them to be able to do it on a horse as well?
Why did you choose the North Downs Way for the first one? Was it something that somebody had suggested, or was it because you're down in Guildford, Cycling UK? Was it a local thing that you thought, well, if we're going to start anywhere, we might as well start in our own backyard?
I suppose it was partly that, yeah, we had quite a good relationship with the guy who manages the North Downs Way, and I think it was, one of those ideas that people had a chat about and thought, oh, this could actually be doable because a decent proportion of it is already rideable. So it's, yeah, how can we link up those bits, and then, yeah, started looking a bit further afield to how can we join up some of these other trails. So that was the idea behind the next one that we did, that was called King Alfred's Way, was to be a bit of a kind of hub that all these spokes would then come into, because that connects the North Downs Way, the South Downs Way, the Ridgeway, and the Thames Path, which kind of, both of those have rideable bits to them. So just one of these things that links them all together. So that's kind of Surrey, Hampshire, Wiltshire, central southern England area, where they all kind of converge. And I think then we kind of changed direction a little bit after that one, because, as I said, that's a loop. And we thought, oh yeah, actually, people definitely prefer circular routes. Which sounds obvious, but just the logistics are easier, and yeah, not kind of so many considerations about how you get back home from Cape Wrath, for example. So I suppose after that we sort of switched focus a bit to, shall we try and do some more kind of loop routes?
And was there any criteria? Did you, I mean, for example, the Eurovelos, the European Cyclist Federation, they have a set list of criteria. Now, I have to say, my experience is that the routes don't always meet the expectations or the criteria that they've set down. But did you ever sit down and say, right, we've got these criteria that we want all of our routes to actually meet in terms of things like gradient, accessibility, quality of surface, or were you quite flexible as to where they went, and you didn't actually have these criteria to stick to?
Yeah, I wouldn't say we had strict criteria, but we definitely had some sort of guiding principles with it. I think A, being traffic free as much as possible, so either on off-road trails or on very low traffic quiet lanes. It being safe if you do have kind of road crossings, making sure, trying to minimize the amount of kind of busy road junctions that you have to negotiate, and then being a sort of overall memorable experience and having a bit of a feeling of adventure, at different levels, because some of the routes are pretty challenging and then some of them are a bit more easygoing, but that somebody could ride it and just, yeah, have fun and enjoy it, for it to be memorable and to feel like an adventure and achievement, I think.
What was the reaction when after those first couple of routes that you published and developed, the North Downs Way and the Great North Trail, and then the third one was the King Alfred's Way? What was the feedback that you were getting? Were people generally pretty positive about what you'd done, or did you have critics? Were people not happy with what you developed? Were there any areas in which you thought, right, okay, if we're going to continue this, we need to focus on this particular area to make sure we don't fall down the same potential pitfalls that we've created for the first two or three routes?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think King Alfred's Way really surprised us with how popular it was, and because of the location, I think, and how easy it is to get to. It's quite close to Swindon and Farnham and Reading and Salisbury, and various places where quite a lot of people live. But at the same time, once you're out there riding it, it does feel quite remote and yeah, more so than you'd expect. Um, and yeah, overall, that's had overwhelmingly positive feedback. It's been really exciting to see people going out and enjoying it and connecting with all the sort of history of the route. And I think one thing we've learned is to make sure we're clear about kind of the terrain and the level of challenge of each route, because I think maybe at the beginning we weren't as clear as we could have been about that. So then the thing I don't want is for people to have an unpleasant surprise if it's different to what they were expecting. We did have a few people who kind of tried to go out and ride it in November after I think we'd had about 2 weeks solid of rain, and then they came back kind of with a few grumpy emails saying it was an absolute mud bath and it was flooded, and you're thinking, well, that's not that surprising, really. It does happen. So yeah, I think kind of trying to be clear about the terrain and good weather conditions and things to bear in mind when people go and ride it is something we've learned in that respect.
So I think that's an interesting comment, because when you look at the website, I'm just scrolling through the various, the main headline images that we've got for all the different routes, and I think it's fair to say that every single image shows what people would describe as backpackers rather than cycle tourists. So they don't have panniers. They're on what look like gravel bikes, mountain bikes, and they're definitely, using bike pack luggage as opposed to panniers. So is it that kind of person that you're aiming these routes at?
I think it's a mixture. I mean, lots of people have done them with panniers and stuff, but it's kind of they're trying to make it as low traffic as possible, and therefore you do end up on kind of a few more lumpy, bumpy routes in some of these places, because we wanted to make sure that it was a bit different to things that are already out there. I think there are a brilliant load of really fantastic road touring routes, and some of the more kind of Sustrans National Cycle Network cycle path traffic free routes. So we thought, well, what can we do that will inspire people to kind of think, oh, I want to do that, that's a little bit different to some of those other things. So that's why we kind of went down the more off-road angle. And I think also those are the ones that are hardest to put together yourself, because on the roads or the kind of existing signposted cycle routes, it's a little bit easier to look at what's there and link it up, or some of those online route planners do that a bit better, whereas you start going into off-road bits and it's just a lot more confusing to figure out where you can go, with all these kind of different types of paths, and you don't know what it's actually going to be like on the ground. So the value of having somebody who's really thought it through and linked bits together and been out and tested it and taken out the bits that are really muddy or really brambly and that sort of thing, I think it kind of makes more of a difference there. And it's also about, I think, getting more people into doing multi-day adventures by bike, because those of us who are used to touring have kind of know how brilliant it is already, but there are a lot of people who, yeah, it is a bit of a bike packing trend at the moment, I think, and people buying gravel bikes, but they haven't done this before, and so they get into this as their first multi-day adventure, and they go, "Wow, this is brilliant! I want to do more of it." And so I think it's a kind of way that's attracting more people into doing multi-day adventures.
Am I correct in thinking that none of the routes are actually signposted? All the support is either online or perhaps in printed material. There aren't any presumably signposts. If I went to for example, the West Kerno Way, would I find a signpost saying this is the West Kerno Way, turn left, turn right, or would I have to be reliant upon online GPS tracks and things like that?
No, we've just done them as online only routes, at the moment, for a couple of reasons. A is because while they were still quite new, we thought actually there is a benefit in having that flexibility, that if, for example, when we had, oh, I can't remember which storm it was, there was a really big storm a couple of years ago that affected the northeast really badly, and loads of Kielder forest was just completely impassable. So then it means you're able to kind of divert it if that's going to be 6 months or so where we need to change the route, then it's easier to do that. And the other reason is that it takes a very long time to get things signposted, especially with routes like these where it's lots of little landowners all along the route. If you've got to kind of negotiate permission with every single one of them over a route that's 300 kilometres long, then we just thought that's kind of not something that we have the resources and the capacity to do at the moment. And we just want to kind of get it out there and make sure that people can enjoy it.
Yeah, I was actually thinking. I was in the car the other day, and I was thinking, I wonder how long it will be before we just kind of get rid of signs, because most people, or an increasing number of people, are just using even when they're driving their car, just using their sat nav. Do we really need to know that Halifax is 3 miles down the road, or Huddersfield is at the end of that road, turn right? And I do wonder whether, even for non-cycling traffic, as the years progress, we'll gradually just get rid of signs, because there is an assumption that people are using electronic devices.
Whoa, radical, Andrew. Get rid of all road signs.
Well, but imagine how nice it would be without all that clutter on the roads, you know. And like you say, it's a heck of a job. Even Sustrans, for the National Cycle Network, they have an army of volunteers who go up and replace signs, and it is a heck of a lot of work. So I think actually you've made a very wise decision there not to go down the signposted route, because I think the advantages of not having signs increasingly is being outweighed by the disadvantages. Anyway.
I think it depends who your route's aimed at as well, doesn't it? If it's kind of more of a beginner family friendly route, then people might not be used to navigating and looking at maps and figuring things out by themselves. So the signs definitely have a value. Whereas I think these routes are maybe for people who've done a bit and kind of know how to follow a route already. So it fits that a bit more without having the signs.
Yeah, right. We will get to the March Castles Way in a few moments, but there's a couple that we haven't mentioned, one of which I still can't pronounce. So we've not mentioned... Have we mentioned the West Kernow Way? That's the one in Cornwall.
Don't think we have.
There's the Canty Way, which is in Kent.
Yeah.
The Rebellion Way, which is the loop around Norfolk. And then the one in Wales, which is called the...
Trawsarari, which means Transnodonia in Welsh, but we thought, as it's a Welsh route, it's fitting for it to have a Welsh name.
As you went through all these routes, was it getting easier and easier, or was it more challenging and more challenging the more that you found out about developing routes? Were you making life more challenging for yourself by knowing all the obstacles in advance and trying to sort them out before you actually publish the route?
I think the West Kernow Way in Cornwall was a very difficult one to put together, actually, just because the proportion of paths that are footpaths varies quite a lot around England and Wales. And Cornwall has a very high proportion of footpaths. So it's really tricky to try and link things up being off-road. So that was actually a very interesting one, where there were a few sections where we used what we call lost ways, which some people might have heard of. Ramblers have been doing quite a big campaign about it, but this idea that these are paths which exist on the ground, have existed for millennia, people have used them, but they've not been recorded on modern maps. So we don't sort of have an official right to use them.
And isn't there a legal thing? I remember reading or seeing something about, isn't there a deadline? Has it passed whereby these particular routes have to be registered, otherwise they'll be just gone forever?
Yes, you're testing me now. So it was the 1st of January 2026, and then it was extended to 2030. And I vaguely remember hearing that might have been scrapped altogether, or it hasn't. So I'll have to go and double check that. But yes, basically people can put in a claim that these paths should be added to the map if they can provide, dig into all the archives and all the historic maps and say, well, actually look at this. So yeah, there was this route called the Tinner's Way, which when you look at on maps from a few hundred years ago, it looks like one continuous road. So it was clearly an important route, but it's kind of got a bit patchy when you look at the modern Ordnance Survey map. There's a little bit of footpath and then a little bit of a track that you're not quite sure what it is, and then a little bit of something else. So we put in a sort of official claim that, based on all this evidence, this should be a route that people can ride the whole distance of. And then we made a bit of a controversial decision to include those stretches in the route as it is, because there's a massive backlog of these claims that councils have to process. So I think it was Cornwall has about 15 years worth of claims that it's going to take to put them all through. So we thought, well, we can't really wait 15 years for this to be looked at when this is an essential link that we need to join the route together. So we're kind of going on the basis that, well, there's a lot of evidence that there is a right to ride on this. So we're going to ride on it.
I think that's probably the best tactic to take sometimes. Just go ahead and do it and ignore the authorities. Dare I say that?
Yeah, sometimes you've got to be practical about things. But the Canty Way in Kent and the Rebellion Way in Norfolk were much easier in that respect, because they're kind of slightly more, gentle, use a lot of existing kind of sustrans traffic-free paths and stuff. They were a bit more straightforward to put together. But the Rebellion Way, the response to that has been lovely, actually, because I think Norfolk's one of those places that people kind of don't necessarily think of going to for a cycling trip. They kind of might not think it's that exciting. But it's actually, there's so many lovely charming little villages and towns, and places you can stop for a cafe or somewhere to stay. And you've got the beautiful North Norfolk coast and Thetford Forest and all these different bits. So it's actually a really lovely ride, and it's been nice to see how many people have actually kind of gone and done it. A lot of them as a sort of first multi-day trip, and it's been great.
On the point of them being multi-day rides, how much did the accommodation situation play when you were planning the routes? Did you think, well, we've got to make this so that we can be broken down into 3, 4, 5 days with places to stay overnight? Did you look at campsites? Did you look at B&Bs? Did you look at that level of detail, or did you think, well, we're here just to provide the route and we'll leave the people who actually do it to sort out their own accommodation?
A little bit of both. So we've done a guidebook for each of the routes, and rather than breaking it down into strict sections, because everyone will ride different distances in a day, so we've kind of suggested, okay, if you want to do this in 3 days, here's the places you might want to stop. If you want to do it in 4 days, here's the places you might want to stop, and kind of picked places that have a few different options. Maybe there's a campsite and a couple of B&Bs, or something like that. There's a bit of a range. When we first did the Great North Trail, because that goes through some areas that are a lot more remote and there just aren't that many options, I actually did a much more detailed directory at the back of kind of these are the different places that you can stay, just to try and help people out a little bit with that. But for quite a few of the other ones that we've done, there are quite a few options. So yeah, we're also trying to kind of support businesses to be more cycle friendly. So we had a bit of a program where we were trying to give them a checklist of these are things that cyclists will want when they come and stay. Have you got a toolkit? Will you do breakfast a little bit earlier if people ask? Have you got a drying room? Have you got somewhere to store a bike? That sort of thing. So we're kind of trying to build up a bit more of a user-friendly map of those kinds of places to make it easier for people to plan their trips.
Have you seen the Facebook group Cycle Camping UK, which has been set up by Neil Whedon, who's a cyclist down in the West Country? Because I think he set up this amazing resource, and it's based upon a Google map, which is now pretty extensive. He's got literally hundreds and hundreds of cycle-friendly accommodation options across the UK that is all user-generated. It's all been generated by people visiting the Facebook page. And that would really tie in well using his resource, Cycle Camping UK, which people can find on Facebook, along with your routes. I think that would be a really good way of combining or perhaps solving any accommodation issues that people have.
Yeah, definitely. I think I'd heard of that, but I hadn't looked at it properly, so I'll have to go and have a look. And I think it's great how, we've kind of got various Facebook groups for some of the routes, and people do just kind of come and say, oh, I've created this Google map from places that people have mentioned. So it's almost sprung up by itself without us having to do it, really. So that's, pretty useful.
Yeah, I mean, all credit to Neil. You may have actually met him at the Cycle Touring Festival because he's a regular at the festival. But he has created a really useful resource. And the next time I'm off around the UK somewhere, I'll definitely be looking at some of the things on that particular Facebook page and on the associated Google map.
Excellent.
We've talked about most of the routes there. Just before we get to the new one, the Marcher Castles Way, have you got any statistics as to how many people are actually using these routes? Do you know how popular they've become?
That's always a really interesting and tricky question, because we can count how many people have bought a guidebook or how many have downloaded a route file from the Cycling UK website. But then people will find the route in all different places. They might get it off, a mate or on a survey or Komoot or any of these other websites. So it's really hard to think, well, how many people are actually riding them? But we had a bit more of a go with King Alfred's Way, because that's quite lucky that it overlaps with these other national trails. So on parts of the Ridgeway, they've got some people counters along the trail. And that was really interesting because they sent us some data for a couple of the summer seasons. I think it was 2021 and 2022. And we noticed that there were 2,000 more people who were riding it from west to east than in the other direction. And we thought, well, King Alfred's Way is mainly kind of we talk about it in a clockwise direction, although people can ride it either way. So that would be people going from west to east along the Ridgeway bit. So I guess that gives us quite a good indication that those 2,000 people are there because they're riding King Alfred's Way. And it's quite useful that it kind of separates out people on bikes as well, so we could tell that. And then we've also tried things with Strava, where we've kind of created little tiny segments on quite isolated bits that you would only really ride if you were doing this whole route. And that's kind of got similar numbers, where it's sort of 2,000 to 3,000 people over that kind of summer period. And so, yeah, that's a kind of a decent amount for King Alfred's Way. That's definitely the most popular one, I think. But yeah, I can't remember the numbers off my top of my head for the other ones.
Yeah, that's quite a clever way of actually trying to assess how many people are using the routes. Yeah, that's quite clever. It sounds to me as though estimating the number of people who use these routes is about as difficult as estimating the number of people who listen to podcasts, because who knows? Who knows? Right, okay, to the Marcher Castles Way. Now, I would imagine most people, if they heard that, wouldn't immediately know where that refers to. So can you just give an overview of what the new route, the Marcher Castles Way, is, and some key facts about the route?
Yeah, so the name refers to this area that it sits within of the Welsh Marches and the Border and Shropshire area. And they kind of had this long running conflict between the Welsh princes on one side and then the Marcher lords on the English side, which is kind of where this Marcher Castle's name comes from. So lots of kind of quite impressive ruins that you go past along this route. And it's quite punchy, this one. It's relatively short. It's 180 miles, but it's got about 5,000 meters of climbing, so it's a fair bit of up and down. You do get some fantastic views out of that when you go through up to Brownclea Hill, which is the highest point in Shropshire. You kind of can see so far all over this fantastic landscape. So it sort of starts in Shrewsbury, and then you go along the Montgomery Canal and go through Iron Bridge, and then down towards Ludlow, and kind of wiggle over around the Welsh border quite a bit, through sort of Prestine and Knighton, and then back towards over the Long Min to Church Stretton, and back to Shrewsbury. So it's a kind of funny shaped wiggly route, but we tried to pick out all the best bits that we could find.
And you do have two versions. There's a full route and there's what you've called a taster loop.
Yeah, so we thought it'd be quite good to make a little shorter version for people who maybe want to do it in a couple of shorter days. I think that one's about 60 miles, so it'd be one mega day or two slightly easier days. And that one kind of gives you a flavour of some of the different landscapes that the full route goes through. And when the guidebook's available kind of in the new year, we're going to have a few other shorter sort of recommended loops as well, because I can imagine it could work quite well if you stayed in Church Stretton, that's sort of in the middle, and then you can do various sort of flower petal loops to ride bits of it without having to carry stuff for people who want to do it a different way.
And when was this officially launched? How old is this new route?
It's very new, so it was only in October that we launched it, so it wasn't that long ago at all.
Why did you choose to launch in October? I mean, rather than waiting, I don't know, until say the spring of next year when people are, because obviously, people, there aren't masses of people heading out in October, November, December, or perhaps there are. Perhaps it's just me.
But we keep trying different times actually, just to see what works differently, because I think sometimes when it gets into the sort of winter period, people are thinking, oh, let's plan something. What summer adventures are we going to do next year? I know I do that. I'm like, oh, it's all dark and cold. Let's imagine we're going out and having adventures and fill up the calendar. But yeah, I think also kind of doing more of a spring and summer launch works quite well. So we'll probably do a bit more of a push on it in spring and say, hey, have you heard about this? Why don't you go and give it a look?
And have you, obviously, Cycling UK has Cycle Magazine, and it's featured, these routes are featured very heavily in Cycle Magazine. Have you had much take up from the wider press? Do you get coverage in national newspapers, magazines? Have they been interested in what you've been doing?
Yeah, we've had quite a bit for some of the routes. I think Trowserurry that we launched last year, which goes through North Wales, that was the first route that we'd done of these long distance ones that was in Wales. So I think that kind of got quite a bit of good to pick up and on local TV and stuff like that. And the Great North Trail, I think, because that was so long, that kind of managed to pick up a bit of excitement. So yeah, it varies depending on different routes. Quite often, the regional papers are quite interested in it just because it's something new and shiny in their area. So yeah, it varies.
Could I just apologise to anybody who's listening to this and thinking, why is he recording this next to a main road? I live in the middle of the countryside, but there was a fire on the M62 earlier, and most of the traffic from the M62 has been diverted down the quiet country road where I live. So if you can hear traffic clattering past, that's why. My apologies.
Oh, no.
Have you had much interest from abroad? Do you get many people coming from other countries to do it, or any interest in the foreign press?
Yeah, we have quite a bit. I always find it quite interesting seeing the addresses when people order a guidebook, because we get a fair few from Germany and from Belgium, and then yeah, the furthest afield has been the States and Australia and Hong Kong. I think we've had, so yeah, real mixture of things. But the thing I've found entertaining is I think especially with the Great North Trail, because that's one of these kind of longer bucket list things, that tends to be the people who come from further away to do that one. And trying to explain to someone who's from Australia or the States that the dreaded midge is something they should fear and don't come and do it in the middle of summer because you'll be eaten alive.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing about the about people coming from Europe. I was talking to Eric. I don't know his surname actually, but he's one half of Wheels to Wander, and he was in episode 84 of the podcast, and he's a real fan of cycling in Britain. And I think, for goodness sake, man, you're from the Netherlands. You live in the country which is just tailor made for cycling. But the point that I think he made was that cycling in a place like the Netherlands, it is kind of almost too regimented. Everything is made for cycling, whereas what he particularly enjoys about coming to Britain and cycling is the fact that you get outside the urban areas, and it is really quite a wild environment, and that to him is quite an appealing thing as a cyclist. So I can see the attraction if you are used to doing most of your cycling in an urban area,
Yeah,
then coming to places like Britain and doing some of these routes, which are predominantly off-road, with not necessarily tarmac tracks. There must be a lot of appeal um, for people who are just used to a completely different type of cycling.
yeah, yeah. I was quite surprised when Eric said that as well, actually. But then didn't he caveat it with, "Well, I've been cycling in crazier places, so the UK is not too bad."
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
But I forget it too, to be honest, because I think I don't actually enjoy road cycling that much in Surrey because the roads are so busy. There's just so many people and, big cars on tiny lanes. But then I forget that if you go somewhere like Northumberland or Lincolnshire or kind of Suffolk, quite often there's, yeah, just miles and miles of lanes with hardly any traffic on. And it is wonderful. And I think we take it for granted sometimes a little bit because we're like, oh, it's only the UK.
Thinking about the future, now you may well have plans that you simply can't discuss. Um, I appreciate that. But are there plans for more routes, and which areas of the country would you particularly like to explore? I don't think you've come to Yorkshire yet. There's nothing in Yorkshire, I don't think. So how about that as your next route, or one of your next routes?
Mm. It's tempting. We've got so many ideas, Andrew. We're just like not enough time to do them all. Um, but yeah, I think it was interesting actually. The North York Moors kind of area was one that was potentially on our list, but then you might have seen Marcus Stitz did his kind of Route YC that goes along the Yorkshire coast quite recently. So we thought, oh well, we don't want to tread on any toes. We'll give that a chance for a little bit. But that might be one to stick in the pocket for future. And it'd be great to do another one in Scotland that's not quite as massively long and is a bit more achievable for people, I think. But yeah, there's a few other areas, kind of somewhere down in the southwest again would be good, or maybe the south of Wales, as we've done the north of Wales. Yeah, lots of different places.
And overall, are they seen by Cycling UK as being a big success? Have they met expectations? Have you been surprised by how positive people have been about the routes, and the feedback that you've received?
Yeah, I think it's interesting for me when I've been working on them a lot because you get so into the detail of looking at the maps and like, oh, right, we need to make sure we've got the guidebook ready, got all the information on the website, kind of thinking of all these little details of things. And then you put it out there, and then you kind of forget that, oh, now people are actually going and riding this. And then I kind of see all these lovely comments on the Facebook groups of people's photos and stuff like that. And you think, oh, wow, they're actually, going out and having a fantastic time. And that's almost the bit that you forget about, that once it's out there, it's people's stories about actually going and experiencing this. So yeah, it's been really great to just have all these comments of people going and doing things and being constantly surprised, I think, by things they didn't expect, or how cleverly things are joined up and how you can skirt around quite close to some of these big cities. The March of Castles Way is really not that far from Birmingham, but you can go for ages and ages on the top of the moors without seeing anybody at all, which is quite amazing. So it's just discovering all these little places in a new way, I think, that they hadn't thought to do before.
Yeah, I did actually notice that it is very, very close to Birmingham. Do you find that the routes which have a very big urban area relatively close by, have they been the more popular routes, do you think? Simply because you have that number of people who are within a very easily accessible distance of the route?
Yeah, I think so. And it also usually makes it easier if people just want to do it in sections and kind of do a train station to train station. Just to, I know a few people who've done a couple of the routes like that, where they've just done them as various days over several weekends, and not done it staying overnight. So it creates a few more options, I think, when it's not so hard to get to.
Have you cycled all the routes?
All of them, except I haven't done the whole of the Great North Trail. I've done the northern part of that one, but I need to go back and tackle the Pennine Bridleway at some point. But yes, I've done all of the other ones.
Right, in that case, I'm going to put you on the spot. Which is your favourite bit, or which is your favourite route?
I think for me, I love mountains. So my two, if I'm allowed to, are Trowserurry, which goes through all these beautiful landscapes in Snowdonia, and the sort of that Anturas Moor northern half of the Great North Trail from Glasgow up to Cape Wrath, just because the landscapes are so vast. You're just on all these kind of gravel tracks going through the middle of mountains and past lochs and these gorgeous valleys. And yeah, it's just spectacular. I think I was very lucky with the weather for both of those trips as well, which probably helped. Otherwise, I might not be so enthusiastic about them.
And when can we expect a ninth route? Is it imminent? Is it 2025, 2026?
Yeah, I will have to double check that. I think we're probably looking at 2026 now for the next one. There's still quite a bit of work to do in the pipeline to sort of pin down exactly where it's going to go and test it out and things, but it will be on its way.
Okay, well, that's been really interesting. I haven't done any of them. Well, I've not knowingly done any of them in their well, I've certainly not done any of them in their entirety, but I'm sure I've done little bits and pieces from time to time. But yeah, perhaps I should put it on the list of routes to do. So thank you for that, and good luck for the future development and the future success of all the different routes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to Sophie for taking the time to chat to me about the Marcher Castles Way. You can, of course, find all the information about not just that route, but all of the routes that they have been developing over the years by visiting cyclinguk.org. And if you are a member of Cycling UK, I would recommend becoming a member. If you're not, it's very, very cheap and very good value. The excellent magazine that they produce once every couple of months, Cycle magazine, you'll find a very interesting article about the Marcher Castles Way in the magazine. So that has been episode 86 of the Cycling Europe podcast. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to get in contact with the podcast, you can do so by visiting cyclingeurope.org/contact. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can do that by visiting cyclingeurope.org/support. And the next episode of the podcast, which has already been recorded, episode 87, we're off to Cyprus, and we're going to be talking about cycle touring on Cyprus. And we're also going to be heading to Spain with a monologue from Steve Cuthbertson. So that should hopefully be out later in December. So watch out for that over the Christmas holidays. In the meantime, Thank you for listening and happy cycling.